The Circus Maximus is an ancient Roman chariot racing stadium and mass entertainment venue located in Rome, Italy. Situated in the valley between the Aventine and Palatine Hills, it was the first and largest stadium in ancient Rome and its later empire. It measured 621 meters in length and 118 meters in width and could accommodate over 150,000 spectators. In its fully developed form, it became the model for circuses throughout the Roman Empire. The site is now a public park. Events and uses. The circus was Rome's largest venue for ludi, public games connected to Roman religious festivals. Ludi were sponsored by leading Romans or the Roman state for the benefit of the Roman people and gods. Most were held annually or at annual intervals on the Roman calendar. Others might be given to fulfill a religious vow, such as the games in celebration of a triumph. The earliest known triumph ludi at the circus were vowed by Tarquin the Proud to Jupiter in the late regal era for his victory over Poemetia. Ludi ranged in duration and scope from one-day or even half-day events to spectacular multi-venue celebrations held over several days, with religious ceremonies and public feasts, horse and chariot racing, athletics, plays and recitals, beast hunts and gladiator contests. These greater ludi at the circus began with a flamboyant parade, much like the triumphal procession, which marked the purpose of the games and introduced the participants. During the Republic, the Aedula organized the games. Although their original purpose was religious, the complexity of staging ludi became a way to display the competence, generosity, and fitness for higher office of the organizer. Some circus events, however, seem to have been relatively small and intimate affairs. In 167 BC, flute players, scenic artists and dancers, performed on a temporary stage, probably erected between the two central seating banks. Others were enlarged at enormous expense to fit the entire space. Eventatio held there in 169 BC, one of several in the 2nd century, employed 63 leopards and 40 bears and elephants, with spectators presumably kept safe by a substantial barrier. As Rome's provinces expanded, existing ludi were embellished and new ludi invented by politicians who competed for divine and popular support. By the late Republic, ludi were held on 57 days of the year. An unknown number of these would have required full use of the circus. On many other days, charioteers and jockeys would need to practice on its track. Otherwise, it would have made a convenient corral for the animals traded in the nearby cattle market, just outside the starting gate. Beneath the outer stands, next to the circus and multiple entrances, were workshops and shops. When no games were being held, the circus at the time of Catullus was likely a dusty open space with shops and booths. A colorful, crowded, disreputable area, frequented by prostitutes, jugglers, fortune-tellers and low-class performing artists. Rome's emperors met the ever-burgeoning popular demand for regular ludi and the need for more specialized venues as essential obligations of their office and cult. Over the several centuries of its development, the Circus Maximus became Rome's paramount specialist venue for chariot races. By the late 1st century AD, the Colosseum had been built to host most of the city's gladiator shows and smaller beast hunts, and most track athletes competed at the purpose-designed Stadium of Domitian, though long-distance foot races were still held at the circus. Eventually, 135 days of the year were devoted to ludi. Even at the height of its development as a chariot racing circuit, the circus remained the most suitable space in Rome for religious processions on a grand scale, and was the most popular venue for large-scale venationists. In the late 3rd century, the Emperor Probus laid on a spectacular circus show in which beasts were hunted through a veritable forest of trees, on a specially built stage. With the advent of Christianity as the official religion of the empire, ludi gradually fell out of favor. The last known beast hunt at the Circus Maximus took place in 523, and the last known races there were held by Totila in 549. Topography and construction. Regal era. The Circus Maximus was sited on the level ground of the Valley of Murcia, between Rome's Aventine and Palatine hills. In Rome's early days, the valley would have been rich agricultural land, prone to flooding from the river Tiber and the stream which divided the valley. The stream was probably bridged at an early date, at the 2 points where the track had to cross it, and the earliest races would have been held within an agricultural landscape, with nothing more than turning posts, banks where spectators could sit, and some shrines and sacred spots. In Livy's History of Rome, the first Etruscan king of Rome built raised, wooden perimeter seating at the circus for Rome's highest echelons, probably midway along the Palatine Strait, with an awning against the sun and rain. His grandson, Tarquinius Superbus, added the first seating for citizen commoners, either adjacent or on the opposite, Aventine side of the track. Otherwise, the circus was probably still little more than a trackway through surrounding farmland. By this time, it may have been drained, but the wooden stands and seats would have frequently rotted and been rebuilt. The turning posts, each made of 3 conical stone pillars, may have been the earliest permanent circus structures. An open drainage canal between the posts would have served as a dividing barrier. Republican era. The game's sponsor usually sat beside the images of attending gods, on a conspicuous, elevated stand, but seats at the track's perimeter offered the best, most dramatic close-ups. In 494 BC, the dictator Manius Valerius Maximus and his descendants were granted rights to a curula chair at the southeastern turn, an excellent viewpoint for the thrills and spills of chariot racing. In the 190s BC, stone trackside seating was built, exclusively for senators. Permanent wooden starting stalls were built in 329 BC. They were gated, brightly painted, and staggered to equalize the distances from each start place to the central barrier. In theory, they might have accommodated up to 25 4-horse chariots abreast, but when team racing was introduced, they were widened, and the number reduced. By the late Republican or early Imperial era, there were 12 stalls. The divisions were fronted by herms that served as stops for spring-loaded gates, so that 12 lightweight, 4-horse or 2-horse chariots could be simultaneously released onto the track. The stalls were allocated by lottery, and the various racing teams were identified by their colors. Typically, there were 7 laps per race. From at least 174 BC, they were counted off using large sculpted eggs. Castor and Pollux, who were born from an egg, were divine patrons of horses, horsemen, and the equestrian order. In 33 BC, an additional system of large bronze dolphin-shaped lap counters was added, positioned well above the central dividing barrier for maximum visibility. Julius Caesar's development of the circus, commencing around 50 BC, extended the seating tiers to run almost the entire circuit of the track, barring the starting gates and a processional entrance at the semicircular end. The track measured approximately 621 meters in length and 150 meters in breadth. A canal was cut between the track perimeter and its seating to protect spectators and help drain the track. The inner third of the seating formed a trackside cavea. Its front sections along the central straight were reserved for senators, and those immediately behind for equites. The outer tiers, 2/3 of the total, were meant for Roman plebs and non-citizens. They were timber-built, with wooden-framed service buildings, shops and entrance-ways beneath. The total number of seats is uncertain, but was probably in the order of 150,000. Pliny the Elder's estimate of 250,000 is unlikely. The wooden bleachers were damaged in a fire of 31 BC, either during or after construction. Imperial era. The fire damager 31 was probably repaired by Augustus. He modestly claimed credit only for an obelisk and pulvinar at the site, but both were major projects. Ever since its quarrying, long before Rome existed, the obelisk had been sacred to Egyptian sun gods. Augustus brought it from Heliopolis at enormous expense, and erected midway along the dividing barrier. It was the first obelisk brought to Rome, an exotically sacred object and a permanent reminder of Augustus' victory over his Roman foes and their Egyptian allies in the recent civil wars. Thanks to him, Rome had secured both a lasting peace and a new Egyptian province. The pulvinar was built on monumental scale, a shrine or temple raised high above the trackside seats. Sometimes, while games were in progress, Augustus watched from there, alongside the gods. Occasionally, his family would join him there. This is the circus described by Dionysius of Halicarnassus as one of the most beautiful and admirable structures in Rome, with entrances and ascents for the spectators at every shop, so that the countless thousands of people may enter and depart without inconvenience. The site remained prone to flooding, probably through the starting gates, until Claudius made improvements there. They probably included an extramural anti-flooding embankment. Fires in the crowded, wooden perimeter workshops and bleachers were a far greater danger. A fire of 36 AD seems to have started in a basket-maker's workshop under the stands. On the Aventine side, the Emperor Tiberius compensated various small businesses there for their losses. In AD 64, during Nero's reign, fire broke out at the semicircular end of the circus, swept through the stands and shops, and destroyed much of the city. Games and festivals continued at the circus, which was rebuilt over several years to the same footprint and design. By the late 1st century AD, the central dividing barrier comprised a series of water basins, or else a single watercourse open in some places and bridged over in others. It offered opportunities for artistic embellishment and decorative swagger, and included the temples and statues of various deities, fountains, and refuges for those assistants involved in more dangerous circus activities, such as beast hunts and the recovery of casualties during races. In AD 81, the Senate built a triple arch honoring Titus at the semicircular end of the circus, to replace or augment a former processional entrance. The Emperor Domitian built a new, multi-story palace on the Palatine, connected somehow to the circus. He likely watched the games in autocratic style, from high above and barely visible to those below. Repairs to fire damage during his reign may already have been underway before his assassination. The risk of further fire damage, coupled with Domitian's fate, may have prompted Trajan's decision to rebuild the circus entirely in stone, and provide a new pulvinar in the stands where Rome's emperor could be seen and honored as part of the Roman community, alongside her gods. Under Trajan, the Circus Maximus found its definitive form, which was unchanged thereafter save for some monumental additions by later emperors. An extensive, planned rebuilding of the starting gate area under Caracalla, and repairs and renewals to existing fabric. Some repairs were unforeseen and extensive, such as those carried out in Diocletian's reign. After the collapse of a seating section killed some 13,000 people. Religious significance. The southeastern turn of the track ran between two shrines which may have predated the circus' formal development. One, located at the outer southeast perimeter, was dedicated to the valley's eponymous goddess Myrcia, an obscure deity associated with Venus. The myrtle shrub, a sacred spring, the stream that divided the valley, and the lesser peak of the Aventine hill. The other was at the southeastern turning post, where there was an underground shrine to Consus, a minor god of grain stores, connected to the grain goddess Ceres and to the underworld. According to Roman tradition, Romulus discovered this shrine shortly after the founding of Rome. He invented the Consualia festival as a way of gathering his Sabine neighbors at a celebration that included horse races and drinking. During these distractions, Romulus's men then abducted the Sabine daughters as brides. Thus the famous Roman myth of the rape of the Sabine women had as its setting the circus and the Consualia. In this quasi-legendary era, horse or chariot races would have been held at the circus site. The track width may have been determined by the distance between Mercia's and consus of shrines at the southeastern end, and its length by the distance between these two shrines and Hercules' Ara Maxima, supposedly older than Rome itself and sited behind the Circus' starting place. In later developments, the altar of Consus, as one of the circus's patron deities, was incorporated into the fabric of the southeastern turning post. When Mercia's stream was partly built over, to form a dividing barrier between the turning posts, her shrine was either retained or rebuilt. In the late imperial period, both the southeastern turn and the circus itself were sometimes known as Vallis Mercia. Temples to several other deities overlooked the circus. Most are now lost. The temples to Ceres and Flora stood close together on the Aventine, more or less opposite the circus's starting gate, which remained under Hercules' protection. Further southeast along the Aventine was a temple to Luna, the moon goddess. Aventine temples to Venus Subsequens, Mercury and Dis stood on the slopes above the southeast turn. On the Palatine Hill, opposite to Ceres's temple, stood the temple to Magna Mater and, more or less opposite, Luna's temple, one to the sun god Apollo. Sun and moon cults were probably represented at the circus from its earliest phases. Their importance grew with the introduction of Roman cult to Apollo, and the development of Stoic and solar monism as a theological basis for the Roman imperial cult. In the imperial era, the sun god was divine patron of the circus and its games. His sacred obelisk towered over the arena, set in the central barrier, close to his temple and the finishing line. The sun god was the ultimate, victorious charioteer, driving his four-horse chariot through the heavenly circuit from sunrise to sunset. His partner Luna drove her two-horse chariot. Together, they represented the predictable, orderly movement of the cosmos and the circuit of time, which found analogy in the circus track. In imperial cosmology, the emperor was Sol, Apollo's earthly equivalent, and Luna may have been linked to the empress. Luna's temple, built long before Apollo's, burned down in the Great Fire of 64 AD and was probably not replaced. Her cult was closely identified with that of Diana, who seems to have been represented in the processions that started circus games, and with Sol Indiges, usually identified as her brother. After the loss of her temple, her cult may have been transferred to Sol's temple on the dividing barrier, or one beside it. Both would have been open to the sky. Several festivals, some of uncertain foundation and date, were held at the circus in historical times. The Consualia, with its semi-mythical establishment by Romulus, and the Cerealia, the major festival of Ceres, were probably older than the earliest historically attested Roman games, held at the circus in honor of Jupiter in 366 BC. In the early imperial era, Ovid describes the opening of Cerealia with a horse race at the circus, followed by the nighttime release of foxes into the stadium, their tails ablaze with lighted torches. Some early connection is likely between Ceres as goddess of grain crops and Consus as a god of grain storage and patron of the circus. Modern status and uses. After the 6th century, the circus fell into disuse and decay, and was quarried for building materials. The lower levels, ever prone to flooding, were gradually buried under waterlogged alluvial soil and accumulated debris, so that the original track is now buried 6 meters beneath the modern surface. In the 11th century, the circus was replaced by dwellings rented out by the Congregation of St. Guy. In the 12th century, a watercourse was dug there to drain the soil, and by the 1500s the area was used as a market garden. Many of the circus's standing structures survived these changes. In 1587, 2 obelisks were removed from the central barrier by Pope Sixtus V, and one of these was resited at the Piazza del Popolo. Mid-19th century workings at the circus site uncovered the lower parts of a seating tier and outer portico. Since then, a series of excavations has exposed further sections of the seating curved turn and central barrier, but further exploration has been limited by the scale, depth and waterlogging of the site. The circus site now functions as a large park area in the center of the city. It is often used for concerts and meetings. The Rome concert of Live 8 was held there. The English band Genesis performed a concert before an estimated audience of 500,000 people in 2007. The Rolling Stones played here in front of 71,527 people on June 22, 2014 for the Italian date of their 14 on Fire tour. The circus has also hosted victory celebrations, following the Italian World Cup 2006 victory and the AS Roma Serie A victory in 2001.